Pomni has been part of the amazing Digital Circus for less time than anyone else. But in just a few episodes, small details have already been building a much bigger story. Hidden moments, system glitches, and discoveries that no one else has made. In this video, we're going to break down Pomni's entire timeline in chronological order, because her story might be the one that changes everything. Before the circus. Something worth saying up front. We know less about Pomni's life before the circus than most people realize. The show has been very deliberate about that. But what we do know, pieced together across several episodes, paints a very specific picture of who she was before that headset went on. At 25, she was working as an accountant for a supermarket chain, living a life that wasn't particularly dramatic or glamorous, and by her own admission, didn't have a lot going on. In her free time, though, she explored abandoned buildings, alone and with a camera, recording everything and uploading it to YouTube, even though nobody ever watched and the channel never really took off. And yet, she kept going, because she was the kind of person who needed something, some mild thrill, some reason to feel like she was living outside the spreadsheets. And then, she walked into the wrong building. The community has pieced together, from the pilot specifically, that the headset she used was inside an abandoned C&A office. You might remember the moment in episode 1. She's running through a labyrinth of old corridors and she stops at one specific computer. Not just any computer. She stares at it, and something in her expression shifts. The show never confirms this outright, but it lands like a memory rather than a reaction. The community's theory, and it's genuinely hard to dismiss, is that this was the actual machine she found during one of her explorations, still running, with a headset connected to it. She put it on out of curiosity, with no grand plan, no special knowledge of C&A, and no idea what she was stepping into. Just someone who was bored and made one decision too many. There is no evidence, none at all, that she knew anything about what C&A had been building. The original employees walked into the circus with context, with a connection to the project. Pomni walked in completely blind, and that gap between what she knows and what everyone else already figured out years earlier is what shapes basically everything she does from episode 1 forward. One more thing before we get to 2017. Gooseworks confirmed at MomoCon 2024 that the name Pomni comes from Russian, where it means remember. Whether that's deliberate irony given how much her memories have been stripped from her, or something that points toward where her arc is heading, I honestly don't know. But it's the kind of detail that's hard to encounter and then stop thinking about. 2017, the first day. By the time Pomni arrives, the circus already has a whole history she is completely unaware of. Kinger has been there longer than anyone can really track, and Ragata, Jax, Gangle, and Zubul all got there years before 2017. The group had already formed its own rhythms, its own ways of surviving, its own understanding of what the circus is and isn't. And then Pomni shows up mid-performance, disrupts the whole thing, and breaks Gangle's mask in the process. That first hour is worth sitting with because it tells you almost everything you need to know about who she is. She panics immediately, which isn't surprising, but what she does with that panic is what's actually interesting. She doesn't shut down. She runs toward the exit sign, even though no one has told her it's real, because her brain immediately starts trying to solve the problem. She doesn't wait for someone to explain the circus to her, and she keeps moving even while Kane is mid-introduction. There's a kind of compulsive problem-solving in her from the start that reads differently than pure fear. Then, she finds Kaufmo's room. I want to be honest about how genuinely disturbing that scene is, especially on a first watch. The walls are covered in the word exit over and over, and inside is something that used to be a person and no longer is in any recognizable sense. That's Pomni's real introduction to abstraction. Before anyone has explained what the word even means, she sees it first, without context and without preparation. But what she does next is the part that still surprises me every time I go back to it. She finds the exit door again, goes through it, and instead of finding a way out, she finds the corridors of the old C&A offices. Real-looking walls, old computers, a world that feels physically different from everything else in the circus. She goes deeper, and then she falls into the void. Nobody else had done that. She is the only character in the show who reaches the void on her very first day, completely by accident and completely without knowing what it is. Kane finds her there, pulls her back, and his reaction when he does is one of those small details the show never comments on but doesn't explain away either. Early adaptation, episodes 2 and 3. Something shifts between episode 1 and episode 2 that doesn't get talked about enough. By the time the Candy Canyon adventure starts, Pomni is already operating differently in the system. She's still scared and clearly not okay, but there's a technical awareness in how she moves through the environment that wasn't there in the pilot. What makes this stretch of episodes particularly interesting, though, is how she handles what happens with Gummigoo. He's an NPC who becomes aware that his memories are fake, that his entire sense of self is constructed, and instead of distancing herself from the situation, Pomni sits with him and tries to explain it, treating his crisis as a real thing worth taking seriously, even though she's also very much in the middle of her own. The show makes a point of showing that the other characters don't do this with NPCs the way she does. And then Kane removes Gummigoo the moment he tries to enter the tent, and Pomni watches it happen without being able to stop it. Episode 3 brings a different kind of revelation. She ends up alone with Kinger in the dark, and what happens next is genuinely unexpected. He becomes lucid in a way he rarely is, telling her about Queenie and the guilt he has been carrying for years, about things that happened in the circus long before she ever got there. It's the first time Pomni is exposed to actual history, something real from before her arrival rather than Kane's version of events, and even if she doesn't fully process what it all means yet, it clearly lands on her in a way that stays. The realization. Episode 4. There's a specific understanding that starts forming around this point, one that doesn't come from any single conversation, but from watching. Pomni watches Ragta lose her emotional filter in episode 4, sees the group fall into genuine conflict, and watches the coping strategies people have built starting to crack. Then there's Gangle, completely overwhelmed outside the food place, screaming and losing her patience entirely while Pomni just stands there observing her quietly, unable to do anything about it. And she starts to understand something the show doesn't put into words for her. Most of the survival strategies she's watching aren't really working. They're just delaying something worse. She saw abstraction in Kaufmo from day one, and she sees the edges of it in other people as the episodes go on. By episode 4, she has a clearer picture of what it actually means to be inside this place long enough, and it is not a comfortable picture. System exposure, episodes 5 and 6. Episode 5 is when Pomni reveals her actual past on screen for the first time. She mentions being an accountant, working for a supermarket chain, the failed YouTube channel, the abandoned buildings. She says it plainly and without apparent trauma around it, which is interesting because it's not exactly a triumphant backstory. It feels like someone who has started to let the circus be real enough that her life before it is also allowed to be real. And then evil Pomni appears. This is something the fandom has spent a lot of time with, and honestly, I think the response is proportionate to how strange and loaded the moment is. Inside the simulation, Pomni encounters a version of herself that is everything she is not. Unhinged, destructive, unafraid. The show frames it as a product of the simulation rather than confirmation of something literal. But the fact that what the system generates when it generates her shadow is specifically, this is hard to ignore. She keeps herself tightly controlled, and something is clearly underneath that. Episode 6 brings another layer. Pomni discovers for the first time that the humans in the circus can conjure, that they have abilities Kane has, and that the system isn't just something being done to them but something they might be able to act on. It's a small shift in how she understands the situation, but it's a significant one. The breaking point, episodes 6 and 7. The confrontation with Jax in episode 6 is worth spending time on because it doesn't resolve cleanly. He tells her that none of it is real, that she needs to stop caring, and she doesn't accept that. She asks him something the show treats as genuinely uncomfortable, whether his cruelty, specifically his cruelty, is part of what pushes people toward abstraction. He starts to answer and then backs off, and that non-answer is its own kind of answer. Then she asks what he would do if she abstracted. He says he would move on and forget about her, and she attacks him physically. He doesn't fight back. I find that whole exchange fascinating because both of them are doing something interesting at the same time. Jax is performing not caring so hard it becomes indistinguishable from actual not caring, except when you watch closely enough, and Pomni is the first person in the show who pushes him on it directly and doesn't accept the deflection. Something in that interaction cracks something small in both of them. Episode 7 brings a different kind of blow. Pomni meets Abel, an NPC who claims to be a former C&A employee and tells the group there is a way out. Reach the console and press the right button. The group moves toward it, and for a moment it genuinely feels like something might change. It doesn't. Abel is eliminated, and the whole setup turns out to be a simulation Kane constructed from the start. Pomni is left with two things that are very hard to reconcile. Genuine proof that escape might be possible, and equally genuine proof that Kane will build entire false realities to prevent them from reaching it. And then there's the console with the actual buttons. One of them supposedly leads out of the system entirely, and Jax presses the red one. She gets to a point in that episode where she understands more about the system than maybe anyone else in the group. She has been present at every significant revelation. The Void on Day 1, Kinger's History in Episode 3, The Truth About Kane's Manipulation in Episode 7, The Failed Escape in the same episode. She has a map that nobody drew for her. Clarity, Episode 8. Episode 8 changes things in a way the series has been building towards since the beginning. Kinger tells the actual history of the Digital Circus, covering where C and A came from, who built it, what Kane is and where he came from, and what happened to the people who were there before. And Pomni hears all of it. What she does with that information is the question the whole show is setting up for the finale. Because by the end of Episode 8, she has something none of the others have in quite the same combination. She arrived last, so she's the least worn down. She found the Void on Day 1, so she knows something exists outside the system. She has been in the room every time the real history came out, and she still hasn't abstracted, which after everything she has witnessed is not a small thing. All season the show had been pointing at one question, and the finale finally puts it in front of her. With Kane gone and the circus coming apart, the group reaches the same wall everyone in the timeline eventually hits. There is no real way out, and chasing one is exactly what breaks people. The trailer framed it as coming to terms with the truth or making the other choice. What the episode does with Pomni is quieter and, in a way, braver than the dramatic version anyone was bracing for. While the others are still reeling from losing Kane, Pomni is the one who, alongside Kinger, starts pulling the system apart to see how it actually works. The instinct that sent her into the Void on her first day, the compulsive need to understand the place rather than just survive it, finally pays off. The two of them reach into hidden parts of the world and start altering things the show had always treated as fixed. And from there, the rest of the group learns to conjure too. The girl who arrived last and understood the most becomes one of the two people who can actually shape what is left. And then, the choice itself turns out not to be escape at all. There is no door, no button, no version of going home that the system will allow. What Pomni lands on, and what the group slowly accepts behind her, is that the only real option is to stop treating the circus as a prison to break out of and start treating it as a life to actually live, even knowing what they are and where they are. It is not the triumphant ending the early episodes seem to promise. It is something harder and more honest, choosing meaning inside an existence you did not pick and cannot leave. That is also where her name finally pays off. Kane, carrying the guilt of everything he put them through, makes amends the only way left to him, showing everyone a video that gives them back the truth, their real names, their human forms, who they actually were on the other side of the headset. Pomni was Abigail Brooks, still an accountant, but no longer the person who explored empty buildings alone because she had nothing else. She learned to open up, made real friends, and some of them show up in the videos she still posts now and then. For a character whose name is a command to remember, the finale lets her do exactly that, and lets her be at peace with what she finds. By the end, Pomni is the closest thing the show has to someone who comes out the other side intact. She does not escape, she does not abstract. She understands what the Digital Circus is, accepts it, and finds a way to keep being herself inside it. After being set up for 8 episodes as the one who could change everything, what she changes turns out to be the only thing she ever actually could. Not the circus, but her relationship to it. So that is where her story actually lands. The girl who walked into an abandoned building out of boredom, fell into the Void on her first day, and spent the whole series paying closer attention than anyone else, doesn't blow the circus open or break out of it. She accepts it, and somehow that reads as the strongest thing she could have done. Do you see her ending as a win, finding peace and connection where everyone else was just surviving? Or as the show quietly admitting there was never a way out for any of them? And after all 9 episodes, what's the one Pomni moment you think actually defines her? Drop it in the comments. I really want to know where everyone lands on this one.